Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this very early but bright morning in New York. You can't hear okay? No? Is it better if I stand up? But that doesn't make my voice louder. But I can stand up. See you. Better now? See, it is this time. Good. Just a quick word of welcome to all of you. First time, I think we need to say that we have more room up front rather than the back for people who come late, but just in case, if folks would like to move up front to a couple of more seats. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me to join this particular presentation for CSW63. My name is Samuel Risk. I'm a team leader for conflict prevention, peace building, and responsive institutions here at the Crisis Bureau at UNDP. And I'm only here to share a few opening remarks and then hand it over to Jessica and the colleagues and the presenters certainly afterwards. We are doing a little bit more, I think, starting the beginning of the year with UNDP's restructuring, including the work in the Crisis Bureau, including the work in gender and responsive institutions and governance, particularly on the localization part. So I think this is part of the work that we are doing together with the gender team and certainly the core government functions and local governance. So the spirit of the discussion, I think, is to hear about how far we can go down with, in particular contexts, with gender empowerment and addressing gender-based violence. So a few quick remarks on my part, and then I will hand it over. For those of you who think that this is the version 5.2 of localizing, it's not 5.2. It is the indicator in the SDG, the goal. And that one reads to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation, ending gender-based violence. And I think that's the overall frame of what we are doing here. Not a surprise that an estimated 36% of women worldwide have experienced GBV in their lifetime. With a cost coming related to health, welfare, social, economic costs for them and for their families and their communities. GBV is deeply rooted in gender inequality and continues to be among the most notable human rights violations, of course, for many societies around the world. I think what is also interesting is that we will also hear from a perspective from the US as well. For those who think that this is something that happens elsewhere in the world, this happens everywhere, including here as well. So I think this is a great opportunity to do so. Gender-based violence is directed against a person because of their gender, and both men and women experience that, but the majority, of course, end up being women and girls. Reducing it, GBV, is a public good that benefits individuals and families and communities in many ways, particularly at the local level. And this is immensely important for not only community integration, but also addressing the issue of today, which is the cost itself. One of the reasons we are doing this among our team as well is for the local governance aspect of it. So local governance remains for the vast majority of men and women in any country, regardless of their political context, the most accessible level of engagement with public authority and state institutions. The local governance level needs to be a prominent entry point for state building and peace building efforts, as there is no sustainable development without that engagement on a social contract and that depth that is rooted in local communities. So this discussion is about inclusion, effectively, of one of the most marginalized and vulnerable segments of populations in our collective communities here and worldwide as well. What you will hear about today is some of the research that is ongoing, And this puts forward a theory that everyone benefits from less violence in their communities. And different sectors can help pay their part for coordinated efforts to address GBV. It illustrates, this research, that the amount of income they could save, or it illustrates the amount of income they could save to look at ways to incentivize different stakeholders to work together to reduce violence. And this is the discussion today: planning and paying, an approach that brings together co-financing and local participatory planning methods as well. Today is not only a discussion about research, but also we will hear practical examples from different parts of the world, focusing on local governments and civil society actors working to address gender-based and domestic violence across different sectors for an integrated approach. We will hear about that from the New York City perspective, where there are some of the most progressive laws in this country aimed at protecting survivors of domestic and sexual violence in the justice system, in employment and education, and also from the Wayru, right? Wayru Commission, I got that, which brings together the experiences of many grassroots women activists from around the world. So what we want to investigate is how community-driven plans can help transform unequal gender power relations and end GBV and amplify voices of the most vulnerable to ensure no one is left behind. There are 4 or 5 specific questions that we will hear about, and then I will hand it over to my colleague Jessica to moderate the discussion. 5 questions. How can community-driven local plans help to transform unequal power relations and end GBV, to amplify voices of the most vulnerable to ensure no one is left behind? How to adapt, coordinate, and complement existing local tools and processes to finance participatory action plans to address GBV? And what is the potential to tap into innovative financing, such as co-financing mechanisms, pooled funds, and crowdsourcing? The third question is, what is the return on investment of participatory local action plans to end GBV in terms of not only GBV reduction and the achievement of SDG Goal 5, but also across other SDG targets like health, education, employment, and social cohesion? Question 4, what are the steps and considerations involved in participatory planning to address GBV, and how can this support contextually how can this be contextually relevant and involve innovative approaches from particular areas? Lastly, how can participatory local GBV action plans impact national discourse and decision making? Once again, thanks to you all. This is a very important discussion for us. I hope it is for you. Yeah, over to Jessica.
Thank you, Sam. The sound is okay, I hope? Great. Well, welcome, everybody. I can only echo Sam's welcome and introduction. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you here at CSW so early in the morning with so many events. So it's really heartening to see the commitment of all of you to this topic. So to give you a sense, I'm going to be very brief because I know that we're all here to hear the presenters. My name is Jessica Zimmerman. I'm part of the UNDP's gender team working on a global project on GBV and ending GBV and achieving the SDGs. And the starting point really is that we're not going to be achieving any of the other development goals unless we take this issue, this pandemic, seriously. And the scale of the problem, as Sam was saying, is just so much larger than the resources available. So we're testing out different approaches to see how we can maximize, optimize, and bring new people to the table to be addressing this. And so that's what you're going to hear a lot about today. Just to give you a sense of the flow of things, first we'll listen to Erin Stern, and we have Michelle, who will be connecting via Skype, who will tell you a little bit about the Planning and Paying project, which is a part of the global SDGs project. Then we'll also hear from Jennifer DiCarlo, and we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for coming, and open up the floor. So before passing over to the panelists today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about them. So Erin Stern, one moment. She's an assistant professor with the Gender Violence and Health Center at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Her background is in qualitative research and uptake, and here I think, to being modest, she's really an expert in qualitative work, which is something that I think we all need to be looking at, not just the numbers, but also the qualitative piece behind it. She's a PhD in public health from the University of Cape Town and an Master of Science in Health, Community and Development from the London School of Economics. She's with us working on this project and has an extensive background working with Sonke and Oak Foundation and many, many others. So thank you for being here today. And Michelle on the line, she's with UNU, so the UN University in Kuala Lumpur. It's a global think and research tank that's focused on public health. She's a health economist with 14 years of experience as a researcher and policy advisor in global health. And she's worked in academia and the UN system, donor development cooperation, and private consulting. She's a very extensive background in health and costing, and she's really one of the few people in the world that are looking at costing of GBV in this way. So we're very lucky to be hearing from her and working with her. And Jennifer DiCarlo, who joins us as the Assistant Commissioner for Family Justice Center Operations at the Mayor's Office here in New York City. It's the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. So in this role, she oversees the operations of the city's 5 family justice centers, as well as their efforts for outreach in the community, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about those efforts. She has over 20 years experience working with survivors of domestic violence in New York City, and we'll be speaking to that experience today. So without further ado, actually, we're going to start with a video to give you a little bit more of the flavor and the sense to kind of set the scene. Let's see if we can, a very short video, and then I'll pass over to Erin. Thank you all.
Cuando yo llegué acá a Villa Salvador, era un arenal, ¿no? Y tan es así que todo era la mañanita cuando uno salía a trabajar, neblina.
Yo he llegado a la edad de 3 años, ¿no? Mis padres son provenientes, mi papá de Ayacucho y mi mamá de Apurímac. Recuerdo más mi infancia aquí en Villa Salvador. A mí, por ejemplo, me encantaba andar sin zapatos y meter mis pies en la arena, porque además cada vez que metía mi pie salían unas conchitas blancas y lindas, ¿no? Y en las noches esas conchitas se veían como lucecitas, ¿no? Y cuando había pues luna llena se veía precioso la arena.
Yo no conocí ese tiempo día, pero lo he visto en fotos y lo veo ahora logrado con el impulso de la mujer de Villa Salvador. Mi casa era una chocita que como coladera era mi casita, ¿no? Y me puse a trabajar desde que amanecía, anochecía, trabajo. Como yo tenía una cocina surge, ¿no? Y ollas, otra señora expresaba cucharones, qué sé yo. Y después nos pusimos a organizar, a hacer un comedor. ya me dediqué de lleno a los comedores. Ya llegué a ser coordinadora, conocer más gente, ver a Villa Salvador, trabajar por Villa Salvador, que falta una cosa, que falta otra cosa, por el bienestar de las mujeres. Fui elegida como coordinadora del colectivo de concertación. Nosotros las mujeres nos reunimos y hacemos propuestas. Medio ambiente, economía, sensibilizamos a la gente contra la violencia, a conocer sus derechos. Nosotros hacemos protestas con propuestas. Y he ganado harta experiencia con lo vivido. He aprendido bastante. Como mujer he crecido.
En un distrito donde hay mucha violencia, tienes tú que enfrentarte a todos los machos que hay, ¿no? A todos los machistas que existen y que dicen que deberías estar en tu casa y no deberías estar afuera, ¿no? Y tú tienes que enfrentar todo esto y poder decir, oye, yo soy capaz de poder organizarme, soy capaz de asumir una dirigencia, soy capaz de ser profesional, soy capaz de tener un trabajo digno, ¿no? Nos juntamos un grupo de compañeras, mujeres de acá de Villa El Salvador y decidimos entre todas crear lo que es el colectivo Mujeres de Arena y como primera actividad hemos impulsado la Escuela de Formación Política para Mujeres, ¿no? Me interesa que las mujeres conozcan cuáles son sus derechos, que ellas puedan estar también en toma de decisiones y que sean capaces de decir, ya, yo quiero ser candidata o yo quiero ser ahora regidora y transmitir lo que saben, ¿no?
¿Cuántos árboles necesita una?
I think I'll also stand just because I know there's some, just to make sure everyone can hear at the back. So if you don't mind switching PowerPoint, that's okay, I'll give you cues. So that was from one of the planning and paying sites in Villa El Salvador's district of Lima in Peru. So nice to start with that and get some of the voices from the local community. So I will start, a lot of this is really in the brief that you will all be able to read more about, but I will briefly go over some of the content of that today. And then as Jessica mentioned, Michelle Remme will join virtually. So thank you. So the kind of background of this global project and this particular participatory and planning paying approach is that we know in many settings, many of the countries we work in, there are these national GBV action plans, often kind of aligned with existing international commitments. But there are many challenges with them, especially with that kind of trickling down to the local level. One of the main challenges is, of course, they're often severely underfunded or a lot about siloed financing. And so Michelle Remme and the university in Kuala Lumpur is looking a lot around kind of coordinated financing and innovative financing, and they'll talk more about that today. You know, a lot of course, lacking local ownership and even relevance of these national action plans. Maybe they didn't involve local communities, maybe they just don't speak to the context of violence in these local settings. So there's a real disconnect often with ownership of these national plans at the local level. So this project is really looking at trying to think about supporting local action plans, LAPs, and which, you know, not only bring local knowledge, local insights into how to address violence against women and girls, support deeper participation of, you know, various stakeholders embedded within those communities, but can also potentially lead to greater coordination across sectors and sectors that traditionally haven't been engaged in gender-based violence prevention or response. And also, so this really model is testing and looking at, you know, these local action plans. They may be able to complement and support these national action plans, but potentially be easier to fund, especially with kind of innovative financing, potentially easier to implement and even evaluate and think about kind of working with different sectors at the local level as well. So there's a lot of kind of, I think, lessons to be learned from this pilot. And as they've mentioned, there's a strong kind of research and learning and innovation and testing component of this pilot, which is great. So this planning and paying approach then really is bringing together different streams. The participatory planning approach, which I'm sure many of in this room are, you know, very strongly familiar with and advocates of, and then also the kind of paying approach. How can we fund and innovative financing, draw on untraditional sectors to fund these approaches to end violence against women and girls. So it's really thinking about multiple sources of financing, including non-traditional ones, and how we can increase efficiency of traditionally separate financing streams. And then also hoping to very much support and work with communities to define their own solutions, their own priorities for addressing violence against women and girls. And we'll talk a little bit today about what's coming out of the quite different settings. But also to establish more sustainable, hopefully, financing for these local action plans that draw on different sectors. So just to emphasize, these local plans are very much trying to think about the key stakeholders embedded within communities, which includes, service providers, of course, but also, of course, community and women's groups, but also local governance, not wanting to exclude that and think about the different sectors of local governance that should be involved in these kinds of action plans. And then thinking about how these costs could be shared by multiple payers, including different levels of government, civil society, organizations, and potentially even the private sector. Thank you. So why this approach is important and relevant to the overall project that Jessica mentioned is a very strong emphasis in the SDGs. Of course, I think all of us in this room will agree that this is key to help drive progress against many other SDGs, not just 5.2. We also think that this, the opportunity to really test and innovate at the local level is really exciting because, of course, the understanding the kind of prevalent types of GBV, how to respond to GBV, local and innovative solutions are going to be best kind of understood within that local level and multi-sectoral level. And we also think that there's an opportunity to really learn about how to coordinate across different sectors and consolidate funding at the local level. And then hopefully some of those lessons can trickle up. So there's a real opportunity, as I said, for learning and testing by having this more local level lens. So this approach then is a collaboration with UNDP and the United Nations University Institute of Gender and Health, and piloting this approach in 3 local lower middle income context settings. I'll talk about those in the next slide, but very diverse settings. It gives really an opportunity to kind of test and research and learn whether this involvement of diverse community stakeholders implementing these local action plans to address GBV, does this lead to better outcomes in terms of kind of more innovative, more grounded, more contextually relevant solutions? Does it lead to deeper coordination among different sectors? And does it lead to more sustainable financing? In many ways, a lot of these questions are unanswered, and this is an opportunity to further test and understand whether this is the case. And what's quite exciting is it leverages both UNDP's expertise in localizing SDGs, in supporting local governance, and then also working with the University of UN, this Institute of Gender and Health, which expertise kind of assessing cost, value for money, and innovative financing strategies. So it brings together a really relevant team for this work. I won't go too much into the different settings, and more detail is in the brief, but just to emphasize, they're in quite different regions, different continents. And I think what's going to be really interesting as well is not only are the settings very different, you have a very, as we saw in the video, you have Lima in Peru, very urban setting compared to a very rural village in Moldova, and then compared to, a semi-rural or peri-urban in Indonesia. But there's also different kind of levels and histories of participatory planning in these different settings. Peru, the video you just saw, there's a very strong history of participatory planning within that district. And there's also quite interesting work already with local governance and kind of multi-sectoral approaches, so the opportunity to further test and kind of see how that's happened compared to the setting in Moldova, where there's not a very strong history of kind of participatory planning within the particular region. There's a very strong disconnect between the local and national level. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how this plays out in these different settings, where I think, again, a richer opportunity for learning comes from. So this is very much, one of the things we really want to elevate from this program is practice-based learning. Like, how do you actually implement local action plans? how do you do it in a participatory way? Of course, looking at how the costing works, because it's an area that I think there is a gap in the evidence in terms of just that practice-based learning. And I think having these 3 different settings, being able to draw on that will be one of the kind of final knowledge products and outcomes we will just have, is how these local action plans worked, the challenges, the steps, the successes, and how it played out differently within these different 3 contexts I just identified. I won't go through this in too much detail, it is in the brief, but just, you know, to emphasize some of the steps that the project is taking and being supported to take, of course, starting with a situational analysis in terms of, you know, who are the key players on the ground, what services exist, what prevention activities exist, what are the kind of local risk and protective factors around GBV. These pictures are actually from a workshop in Moldova last year, where a multidisciplinary team, which has been established as part of this plan, which brings together different civil society and government actors within this region to kind of be embedded in this local action plan. This is really a map of drawing out the kind of what they identified as the key risk and protective factors, using the socio-ecological model as just a starting point to reflect on the kind of contextual issues to address. In terms of the participatory planning, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, some settings, this might be that, you know, they're real experts and they've had a long history of this. For some settings, it might be quite new, and there might be a lot of capacity needs for even doing participatory planning, for ensuring kind of coordination among different groups that maybe haven't worked together traditionally. So I think, you know, as part of this, it's really important to identify where those capacity needs are and try to respond to those and work with those capacity needs as part of planning. And then one of the things that the local action plans are trying to support is not only to focus on, you know, response, but also prevention, to have integrated activities so that it's localized, but it's also comprehensive and addressing both prevention and response to violence. And then, of course, a big part of this project is to be able to monitor, to evaluate, just to learn how these participatory plans play out. Do they, you know, as I mentioned, we have these kind of overarching hypotheses, but does that actually play out in these settings? And to ensure that there's kind of ongoing participatory evaluation as well, so that it's from the kind of community reporting on progress and how they see it working and the change from that. And so there will be a lot of those kind of qualitative practice-based learnings as part of this pilot. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to talk about before I hand over to Michelle is, as we know, you know, the principle of leave no one behind is fundamental to this work and particularly important to this participatory planning approach, because to be very careful of, you know, who is being excluded or included in these dynamics, kind of recognizing power dynamics that exist at these different levels, and recognizing who is more prone to both GBV or less likely to access justice and services within particular communities. For the local action plans, some of the ways this is embedded in our work, we're thinking about this, is that the situational analysis should, of course, be very carefully identifying who and to what degree different groups are being left out. There's a resource, a UN resource in the brief that we mentioned that's very helpful for kind of working with community groups to identify some of the key factors that may be leaving people behind, to kind of more critically reflect on that. And of course, with the local action plans, you know, ensuring that those marginalized groups can safely and meaningfully contribute to these local action plans, and how do we ensure that that's embedded and also part of our own monitoring and learning in terms of how to do that. But also being very careful to ensure that there's strategies to ensure kind of coordination, create solidarity, and not to kind of re-emphasize differences. So of course, as we know, this is a difficult balance, but to really think about how we ensure that marginalized groups participate in it, and not just, you know, token participation, but meaningful participation. So I just wanted to say a note of that before we hand over. So I think now we can have Michelle, who will speak a little bit more about the costing, and then we can come back together for a discussion.
Thank you, Erin. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
We see you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erin, and good morning, everyone. Thank you also to Jessica for the kind introduction. I just wanted to, as Jessica mentioned, I work at the UN University under the International Institute for Global Health. We're a think tank for the UN system on global health, and we aim to support UN agencies, UN programs, and member states to advance evidence-based policies for health. So I'm very happy to be joining you from afar for this session and to share some of the work we've been doing with colleagues at UNDP. I'll just take a few minutes to speak to the paying component of this model in a bit more detail. So as you heard from Erin, we're working with the hypothesis that participatory planning will lead to better and more comprehensive local action plans, and that participatory paying will contribute to better resourced and more sustainably financed plans. So the idea is that resources could be pooled from multiple payers or multiple budget holders who have different objectives that they're seeking to achieve. From an economic perspective, this could lead to a more efficient allocation of both public and potentially private resources than if each payer or sector was planning and allocating its resources in isolation and not considering any of the spillover benefits or costs of their actions or interventions. So this idea is really based on the shared benefits of reducing gender-based violence and of jointly investing in local action plans and how jointly investing in local action plans could reduce risks for each of the payers individually as well. And it could also, going forward, enable implementation at scale. Another point is that sharing responsibility and resourcing could not only increase coordination and sustainability, but it could also ensure greater accountability to multiple stakeholders. If multiple stakeholders are at the table and are putting resources into the bucket, they're more likely to want to make sure they're seeing results and to be holding each other accountable to those results. Can you move to the next slide, please? So this is a simple illustration of the co-financing argument that you've been hearing about. The idea here is that in red, you have the total cost of the gender-based violence local action plan. If sectors are planning and allocating their resources in a siloed approach, so within their silos, and none of them would be considering the spillover benefits to others. And in this case, what you're seeing is that none of them would be willing to cover the full costs of the local action plan, because the level of benefits that the plan generates for their specific sectoral objective would not be worth the full cost. They may then decide to stick to doing what they do to get those benefits, and they might achieve those same benefits. But if you would co-finance and pool resources, essentially, the local action plan could be fully funded. It's a very simple example in that the bars here just add up. And so what you're seeing is that in a siloed approach, it doesn't get funded and then it does. But actually what is more interesting in terms of efficiencies is that what might be happening is that each of these sectors might be paying more separately than they would pay to achieve the same objectives if they pooled resources. So in that sense, they might even be able to generate cost savings from co-financing, and it could lead to more efficient financing decisions. Next slide, please. So in this project, we are trying to integrate costing and financing considerations at different steps in the planning, implementation, and evaluation cycle. And this is really to make sure that we have the right economic and cost data to inform different decision points along the way. So at the planning stage, and you'll see more details in the brief, but once stakeholders have been able to identify the needs and identify local solutions that they want to include in the local action plan, we're supporting planners to also map out the expected activities, link those to expected outcomes, and then at this point, use those expected outcomes to start to explore what might be the potential financing sources, so who might be the potential payers that would have interest in those outcomes and those benefits. And then once there's a sense of who might see a benefit and might also be willing to contribute, local planners can then have a more realistic estimate of the total budget that they have available to implement the local action plan, and then they can use that to really prioritize in a participatory manner, and to have really transparent discussions and explicit consideration of how value for money and affects the decision, well, how the decisions they make affect the value for money of the overall plan, and incorporate those trade-offs in planning to the extent that data is available, of course. I just want to highlight this because I think it's very important to make sure that even though aspirational budgets are important to make a case for increased funding, once resources are really allocated in a kind of budgeting cycle, it's important for that to be done based on a real budget constraint. Because otherwise what happens, there's this risk that, plans get costed, a funding gap is estimated, and then, and that's all done in a participatory manner. But then when it comes to annual budgeting, suddenly there's a very real constraint to work with, and activities get prioritized in an ad hoc manner, and at least definitely tends to be a less participatory manner. So if we integrate that into the decision-making process, we might get more efficient outcomes. Next slide, please. So you've been hearing a lot about multiple sources of funding, multiple payers. So who are these potential payers and budget holders that could be convinced to co-invest in local action plans? And what are these different sources that could be tapped? So here are a few examples of what we're thinking about and what we're exploring in these pilots. Of course, government budgets are a critical one, and what's interesting there and what we're trying to look at in more depth is the different levels of government funding, because you have national sources from the national level that do trickle down to the local level in an unearmarked way or in an earmarked way. There are subnational funds, community funds. There are also specific development funds for marginalized or underdeveloped communities that can be tapped. There are different sector budgets, which we're all more familiar with. The private sector that could have, could be convinced that they could improve, productivity, or there might be benefits for them to invest in these plans from that perspective, or from a corporate social responsibility perspective, social welfare and health insurance funds, and finally some more innovative sources like crowdsourcing online, which is something that Moldova, for example, is exploring in their pilot. Next slide, please. So the planning and paying are really integral components of the model, and they're fully aligned, which hopefully this figure illustrates. I've been talking a bit more about the planning and inception stage, where it's important to cost the activities and identify financing sources to estimate a realistic budget for planning. But then during the implementation stage, we are working in these pilots to collect cost data. And at the evaluation stage, at the end of the project, there'll be a process evaluation to assess success, some measures of success. We will then estimate how much it actually costs to implement these action plans looking back, and we will combine that with the evaluation data to assess value for money. And what we're going to do here is we're going to look at value for money across a range of outcomes, so not just GBV outcomes, but other social, economic outcomes that touch on different SDG targets to really make a case and advocate for replication and scale up of the action plans and of the model with multiple sectors and payers at the table, as of course, depending on the results from the studies. And next and final slide, just to conclude with a few summary points on the expected benefits of participatory planning and paying models. As you've heard, we think that participatory planning and paying could enhance the governance and capacity of local level stakeholders to prevent and respond to GBV. It could also contribute to better and more sustainable financing from multiple sources and multiple payers. It could ensure integration of gender-based violence plans in local planning and budgeting, rather than it staying sort of sitting outside the mainstream. It's really important for it to be integrated within existing structures. And finally, such plans can be better owned and more sustainable, irrespective of external or other political changes or pressures. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's still on. Thank you, Michelle, Erin. I think it was a great introduction to the local action plans and using participatory action plans as a way to sort of not only harness the existing knowledge and the existing initiatives that are already there, but as a way to, through the participatory planning, give voice to everybody, including survivors. And that's one thing I do think it's important to mention, is that it's very much a survivor-centric approach that we're taking, and hopefully we'll see the results in terms of accountability and, bridging across silos. And I think that's where I hope Jennifer will speak to her experience, as New York City has a very interesting multi-sectoral approach with very high-level political support. So looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank UNDP and Jessica for inviting me to join you today. I don't usually get to come up this way, so I appreciate that. A little early for me. I was proud to be on time. So as the bio said, my role at my office is to oversee the city's 5 family justice centers. So I work for a commissioner. Her name is Cecile Noel, and she was appointed by our mayor, Mayor de Blasio, to run that office 3 years ago. My job there is really to make sure our family justice centers are working, and we're doing it in strong collaboration and partnership with our NGO and city partners. I also oversee the outreach efforts for the office. So this morning, I don't have a fancy PowerPoint, but it was really fascinating for me to hear about your work, because I feel like I'm a really good example of a local program in action that is trying to achieve this. And we've started some evaluation efforts, but we're a long way from where we want to be. So what I hope to do today is just give you kind of broad strokes about what the family justice centers are trying to do, how we do that, and then talk a little bit about some of the challenges with the model and then the benefits. And I'm going to try to do it quickly because I know we want to have time for discussion. Have people heard of family justice centers before I walked in the door? Yeah, I see one hand. I clearly have 2 hands. I clearly have some outreach efforts to do. But the goal of family justice centers are to put city agency partners and NGOs under one roof to make it easier for people to get help. It sounds easy. Okay, everybody move into a building together and it'll be much easier for someone to walk in and get help. It's not easy. My office's role is to run those operations and do all of that coordination. So a lot of what you were talking about, my office, the mayor's office to end domestic and gender-based violence, that is a mouthful. We are the coordinating body at those family justice centers, trying to make sure that the services are high quality, that our partners are supported and working well together. And so that's the role of me and my staff every day. And the model started back in the early 2000s in San Diego in the United States. It's now a national best practices model for serving survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. You'll hear it referred to as a one-stop shopping center. I don't really love that. I don't love the image that puts out, but the idea is that a survivor can walk through the door. You do not need an appointment. All of the services are free, and everybody is working under one roof to try and support that survivor. So if you walk in and you need help getting into a shelter, we're going to be able to help you do that. In New York City, I don't have shelter beds in those centers because we have almost 3,000 domestic violence shelter beds, so I couldn't put them, in one building. But we do the advocacy and the linkage to those NGOs to get someone into shelter in an emergency situation. We also have our prosecutors on site. So the people that are elected and have teams of prosecutors who are prosecuting someone after they've been arrested for domestic violence or gender-based crime. We do have very aggressive laws in New York State. We have a mandatory arrest policy. So if there is evidence that a domestic violence crime was committed, that person would be arrested and we'd be meeting with the survivor at our center, and then actually helping them with many of the supports that they're looking for that are not criminal justice related. I think many people know you're here, you're doing this work. Do most survivors want to see the person they love, the father or mother of their children, go to jail? No, most don't. Most don't. They want to be safe. They want their children to be safe. They want to be financially supported. They want to have a roof over their head, but they often don't want that person to spend time in jail or have criminal justice sanctions. So we spend a lot of time providing those other supports while the criminal justice system may or may not be looking at jail time, depending on how serious that crime is. So we're going to help somebody with economic empowerment services. We have classrooms at our centers that provide career readiness classes, computer literacy classes that get people certifications and then connections to jobs that help people with interviewing skills, going right at some of your SDGs. And this is new language for me, so I'm trying my best. I'm definitely an example of local policies, but we're really trying to get at that economic empowerment, which is really at the heart of this for many of our survivors. So we're going to help with that. We're going to help with counseling, mental health counseling. So many of our survivors are PTSD survivors. They've experienced a lot of trauma, whether they're a victim of sexual assault or sex trafficking or intimate partner violence or all of that, because we know that all of these types of victimizations, they don't exist in buckets. They're not silos. They're all interconnected. And so that is why my office recently changed our title to be the Mayor's Office. That's why I'm struggling with it, to end domestic and gender-based violence. We used to be the Mayor's Office to combat domestic violence. But our mayor recognized that you can't do this work in buckets or silos. If you're taking on GBV, you have to take on all of those types of victimizations. So we'll help with mental health counseling. We have counseling on site. We have psychiatrists on site from our city's Health and Hospitals Corporation. If a client wants to meet with police and report what's going on, we have officers on site so they can do that and make reports. The officers wear plain clothes. That's huge. For many immigrant survivors, we're a city of immigrants in New York City. 65% of the clients we see at our centers are foreign born. So we need to make sure that we are providing culturally responsive, client-centered services. So if someone reports to police, they may not want to walk into a precinct, they don't feel safe. So we have culturally specific providers on site that speak languages of our clients. So we have a provider that works with our African clients. We have a full-time provider who works with our Arabic-speaking clients. We have many people who come in and need to meet with our clients' practice. They do New York Asian Women's Center. They meet with our Asian clients. So we really try to make sure that someone comes in and they're going to see themselves, right? They're going to see somebody who understands their culture and their community. We also provide wellness services for survivors. So we have yoga classes and meditation classes. We do Zumba for survivors. We have an entrepreneurship program where clients make jewelry and then learn how to sell that on Etsy. So the goal is to meet the person where they are, help them get connected to services, and provide it in a holistic, comprehensive way, all based on what the client wants. It's the basic premise of social work, right? You start where the client is. But our role is to make sure that those city partners and those local government partners are coordinating together. And that's not easy, as I said in the beginning. Our police officers have a very different goal than our NGO providers, right? Police officers want to make arrests, our prosecutors want to prosecute the abusers, but our NGO partners just want to support the clients. So our job is to kind of help in that coordination, but it works because our office is neutral. We're the mayor's office, we're supporting this, we get the city partners there, and then we help with that coordination that really needs to happen every day. Some of these centers have failed around the country because they're just offices. They're not actually talking to each other. They're not working with each other, and that's not what our centers are. So we require all of our partners to go through really intensive training on a number of different subjects and be vetted to be able to work there. We provide a lot of support to the clients and to the agencies, but it's like they're working independently, but within our house, and then we're helping with that collaboration. The things I would highlight in addition to the Family Justice Center work, people ask us all the time, well, how do people hear about the centers? What do you do for that? We have one in every borough, and there are over 40 agencies on site, city and NGOs. So people bring in their own clients, and police love having all of the services in one place because you only have to remember one thing. Before you had to remember like 45 different agencies. Now you just remember one place to refer. Our court systems refer to us. And then we look at our data to figure out where are kind of the hot spots in New York City when it comes to domestic violence. We have not got it all figured out here in the States. We still have a serious domestic violence issue. Every year in this city, we have over 35 victims killed by their intimate partner. That's way too high. New York City is the safest big city now in the country. Everyone wants to come here. We're very safe. Our murder rate is incredibly low, which is wonderful. But our rate of people being killed by their intimate partners has stayed pretty much the same and only decreased a little bit. So what does that tell us? We've got more work to do, right? This is a hard issue. Even with like a giant city with big resources and big money, it still takes a partnership and collaboration of all of us to have honest conversations, to really address our different philosophies around this issue and have a local government partner kind of play that coordinating role. And that's really what we're trying to do. So with outreach, we also, we don't just go out and say, come to our domestic violence workshop. No one wants to sign up for that. I'm being honest, it's a very hard issue. You have to think about it from supporting and strengthening community, helping people learn about healthy ways to relate to each other. So we actually do like a love song karaoke workshop. Everyone signs up for that one. And we actually have people sing love songs. And then we talk about what those words actually mean, because much of our pop culture here in the States is not that healthy if you listen to those songs, right? So we also do art workshops, and we talk about this through the lens of art and power and community. So we really try to be creative, because if you just go in and talk about what domestic violence is and isn't, and no one's going to open their ears. But this is a hard subject to get at. So I'd encourage all of you to think creatively when you're thinking about how to do that outreach within community. I'll end with the numbers. Across this city, we see about 265 survivors a day at every one of our centers. We have 5 centers, 1 in every borough. We have the largest network of family justice centers in the country. We are really lucky to have a mayor and his wife, Shirley McCrae, who is incredibly supportive of us. So they really know that GBV and DV is at the heart of so much. Our homelessness system, we have a lot of families in homeless shelter, and about 40% of them, there's a connection to domestic violence, right? This goes at so much, your ability to work, your ability to support your family, all of that is related. In our schools, we have many, many children that have domestic violence in their homes, and then they go into school, and guess what? They act out or they have challenges. So our mayor and his administration really understand that. And they figured out a way to look at our different funding sources and build in the Family Justice Center funding within those contracts and within those fundings. So we have a core contract to provide services to crime victims, and one of those contracts is for family justice centers. So our NGO partners can apply for that funding and then come on site to our centers and work with us in collaboration. And then they also use various pots of state and federal dollars to do that. So I always get that question, like, how do you pay for this? So it's really looking at those sources of funding. And we also use private dollars and apply for private foundation funding to do kind of the add-on programs that serve children and serve families and look at wellness and those types of things. So we have a lot of work to do, obviously, from those numbers I shared with you, but I do think the model is really going at what you're talking about. It really focuses on collaboration. It focuses on partnerships and really respecting each other's roles and putting the survivor at the forefront. We have a committee of survivors that kind of gives us advice and helps us when we're trying to change policies or look at our different training modules or things like that. So that is huge, and that's wonderful that you're doing that. So I don't want to take any more time because I know you want to get to questions, but again, I really appreciate just being in the room with all of you, and it makes me feel honored to kind of be in this work with the whole world, and we forget that sometimes when we're going about our business in New York City. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's great to see it in action. And I should mention before going further, we do have some flyers.
Yes.
Well, it's more for if any of this is triggering and you want support, then please come up. Here we do have that for you. So before we open the floor for general questions, I know we're a little bit short on time, but we have Lana Louise Finnegan is here. Is she here from the Peru Commission? And we'd love to hear if you can add to the diversity of experiences, because I think so much of this is, we talk about the importance of local context and context specificity, but I think what we're also trying to draw out is some global lessons. So I'd love to hear your reflections on this. And just a couple minutes if you can make your remarks.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
And I'm here with my battalion. There's a lot of us here. And for us, we are a movement across 59 countries. And we have been working as grassroots women all over the world. We work on land, we work on safe cities, we work on resilience, we work on HIV/AIDS, etc., etc., etc. And as grassroots women, we have best practices that we work with. And one of my personal work that I do with Sister and Theatre Collective, as you know, it's a theatre company, so we use the performing arts. We have done safety audit tools, which we work with the local government authorities at the local level. And when we do that, we give them the plan, we give them the survey, we give them the information. Oh, slowly. Audience. Right, so basically, we are here from Africa, Mexico, Peru, Guatemala, Trinidad, Jamaica. Who am I leaving out? Philippines, Malaysia, Canada, the whole works. And we have a diamond that we call the Wairo Commission diamond. It is something that we use as our core value, which we use to guide our work. And what it speaks to is strengthen grassroots women leadership and in organizing, promote development through awareness and local initiative, building constituency and network, influence change, public policy and processes. And in that process, it allows us to partner with everybody and work at the local level. Our work does not go by itself. Gender-based and gender issues are what the plank of our work. So every issues that we work with, we look at gender lens from that perspective. So if it is land that Violet and Mina is doing, gender comes in. They'll deal with mental health and the other gender comes in. Safety audit tools, gender. I know Ali deal with indigenous persons. We look at from gender from that lens. And basically what we are saying is that as grassroots leaders, and I saw the first presentation, that at that level, we have best practices. We are on the ground. We know what it is. We know what we need to do. We know how to get the job done. And we are saying that UN agency, government, local authorities, ask us, come to us, because we know how to get the job done. We want you to partner with us. We want you to work with us. We will help you to look at the issues, to identify them. We know where the things are happening on the ground. We know where the places is safe. We know where the places are a trouble spot. We also is asking and calling for UNDP to partner with the Wairo Commission to look at how best we can look at funding sources through private, government, entities, foundation, and to really find a way of doing funding to help grassroots women and women at the local level to enable them to do the things that they have to get done. And if you work with us and partner with us, then you'll see a better society in the world. Thank you.
here. Thank you very much for those remarks. I know that we have a couple of friends from the UN family who are here that we are hoping to, if you could be quite brief and just sort of introducing yourself and your reflections on this and some of your experiences. Mohammed Abadi, okay, great, from the UNCDF. It would be great to hear your reflections, and Lisette there you are. Great to see you. And then of course we'll open up the floor to hear from all of you. So Mohammed and Lisette, I will ask if you can keep it a little bit short. Great.
Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed Abadi. I'm the Senior Investment Manager at the UN Capital Development Fund. I'm a gender economist by practice and focus on local economic development in the least developed countries and post-conflict countries. So my intervention here is, I'm going to start with a story. So I was in the field in a small district in Cambodia. And very interesting, the territory of that district. It's a local government. There's a local government setting, but there's a big tall mountain, and a lot of the rural women carve the mountain, and then they plant. And then down there on the flat land at the bottom of the mountain, there's also the rural economy there is thriving. Now, both of them do sell their products to a local market that is almost at the outset of the capital city, about 20 kilometers away. Now, what is very interesting is that, by the time the local women from the mountains take their products and they produce, the agriculture produce, and take it all the way to the market, about 40% of their produce goes to waste, because the infrastructure roads are so bad that the products are perishable. So then they're left with 60% of what they have produced. And remember, these are local farmers. So everything they produce is very precious to their well-being. Now they go to the market to sell their products, and about 85% of the sellers in that market are women. 90% of the wholesale buyers are men. What happens now, do you think, at that market setting? The price negotiation with the women who are coming from the mountain are a huge disadvantage, because the wholesalers know they just lost 40% of their produce. So now this is how really in reality they are subject to violence, they're subject to sexual exploitation, and then they keep even waiting and waiting until it almost is getting dark to give them the lowest offer you can think of, because they know it's dangerous in the market for them to stay, and they're desperate to go back, so they will sell at any cost. Right? That is the truth of how gender-based violence and local economic development are interconnected. So why I'm telling you this example is because, throughout the whole presentation, it's very important for you to understand what is local and local development. Local cannot be just taken as neutral, as part of the local development plans, a part of the local action plans. You really need to dissect the topography, geography, the social and economic norms in that local setting, for you then to be able to respond effectively to problems. Otherwise, if you consider everything is neutral in that local setting, and here we're only talking about a small district, then you're also part of the problem, right? And that is also how you waste, I would say, local government precious infrastructure money that is highly needed to respond to those impediments that face women on a daily basis. So that is my number one. Don't assume neutral, right? Go local. Number two, and I keep it very brief. My number 2 point here is, there is something called participatory planning process, and this is very important. But there's something called informed participatory planning process, and that is even more important. So you can try to bring in, people right and left from a local setting and ask them, what are your priorities? You end up with a shopping list. But if you're able to do a gender-sensitive local economic assessment that has GBV integrated in it, and you run this assessment, have the data. What are these bottlenecks that prevent women from entering the labor market? What are these bottlenecks that prevent women from fully participating in market negotiations? The GBV aspects of it, the infrastructure needs, etc. That is when you're able to then be able to inform the local community of your findings, and then together participate in prioritizing what infrastructure needs are actually more adequate. Goes back to my point number one. My third point, and now I'm going to really make it very, very short here. Everything we talked about today is a function of local authorities. It is their mandate to really provide that service, to be able to govern, plan, budget, and invest. But in most cases, local governments are the ones who are actually getting the peanuts from the central government, even though that is where the majority of the people live, that is where the majority of poverty is, and that's where the majority of the all the SDGs impediments are, right? So the thing is, should we stop there? So if we have a GBV local action plan or an LED strategy that is underfunded, do we stop here? No, we don't. There is so much more we could do by also tapping into the societal plus the private sector. So forming public-private partnerships is very critical as another source of financing for local governments. But you are faced with two problems. Number one, the tradition of the public and private working together is almost non-existent. There is no trust between the local authorities and the private sector. Number two, the community themselves don't have trust in their own local authorities, because the trap that a lot of policymakers fall on is that they plan big, but then little gets done. So then with time, people don't trust that system you just have put in place. So my closing remark there is, think big, but start small and effective, prove it works, so you can start to build also confidence in the local communities and the local governments. I have more, but the time is short, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Lisette Soria. I work for UN Women for the Global Program on Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces that we also collaborate with Wiring Commission. I'm an urban sociologist and Peruvian, so actually I was very excited to see the first video about my hometown. I just want to be brief because I know we don't have time, but I also would like to highlight a couple of points based on these presentations. So one is that in our program with Global to create safer spaces for women and girls, one of our key principles is actually participation of women organizations in any of these local government plans and development plans. This, of course, is a key principle for us because as UN Women, we promote women participation and leadership in every decision we take place. And I just want to remember that, for example, in our program, it was informed of 40 years of community organization from women grassroots groups advocating for safer spaces for women and girls. Before the UN, before the local governments were working on it, who was there in the first place? It was this women rights organization telling us, we need to do this, right? And how we do this. Second, one thing that we want to do also more in this program is to create more linkages between South-South, North-South, exchanges between local governments and women rights organizations. So it's also for us a priority that in these global exchanges, we have participation from local government, but also women rights organizations. Because what are they telling us? They are telling us nothing about us without us. So we don't want to tell the story from the UN perspective or even from the local authorities. We want to tell the stories from women's voices themselves. And third, something that I also would like to highlight is that in terms of best practices, in concrete, what we have learned from our pathway on this work is that, for example, in many cities, actually the local government has allocated their own gender budgets to work and create these safer public spaces. This for us is sustainability in terms of local development plans, because it's not us funding this work, right? I can give you examples of Montevideo, Santo Domingo, even some cities also in Africa, how they're allocating their own budget and in their own gender equality plan, how to advocate, how to advance these strategies to make safer cities for women and girls. Also, another way that we concretely help and support, because our role is a convening role and to support what is already there, is empowering women leadership skills of both women in local government and women rights organizations. So, for example, in Manila, in Quezon, in the Philippines, we work very closely with the women rights organization, so we were able to pass a legislation on how to address and prevent sexual harassment in the public spaces. right? And this women leadership model became a model for other cities of how they can also advocate for this type of work. So I just wanted to be very concrete in these specific practices, and happy to hear all these great initiatives. Thank you.
Great. So I'm looking all of you now to see if there are some questions. We do have some. Pardon me?
Online questions.
Yeah, we have some in the audience first, so maybe we can, if I can get a show of hands to see if you've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we'll go sort of up the rows here. And maybe introduce yourself, and there's a pronoun that you prefer so that when the respondents can respond, they can do so respectfully.
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Violet Shibutse. I'm a grassroots woman from Kenya and the chair of the Wairu Commission. And my big role in the community has been supporting grassroots women, because I'm one of the grassroots women. We have been developing community-driven processes that spearhead issues around violence against women. And the entry point was addressing very big issues that were related to women land rights. Women were being thrown out of homes every time to time because of their HIV status, or they lost their husbands from HIV. And we did a mapping to identify how the magnitude of the issue, and this is the process which started engaging the stakeholders. What I mean to say is, as much as we are talking about localizing, unless we put grassroots women themselves on the forefront of leading this process, so that even if we are talking about local authority, the grassroots women are at the center of leading process, collecting data, speaking to each other, speaking to their community, to start igniting the community to speak around the issue affecting them, and then leading an action plan that can be able to address these issues, and being in charge also of monitoring these action plans between the local authority and the grassroots women. We cannot actually go anywhere. We have seen it, and I have a big experience, and I can talk about it more because I know we don't have time. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that the judiciary is a big actor in denying women to access justice. The cases that go, like rural women, cases that we refer to the judiciary or must go to the judiciary, have taken forever. They don't care where the woman is staying, if the woman has been thrown out of homes, and there has been nothing that is holding the judiciary accountable on the cases of women. It's a long bureaucracy, very expensive. Women are asked if they are dealing with someone who has money, or if they are complaining about a market, they are also in war with the local authority. Remember, if they have been thrown out of a market, they are in war with the local authority. The local authority will hire a lawyer who will be going to court. These women market vendors do not have a lawyer, and the process is really complicated. So if you are talking about localizing, please, let's see how we can ensure that the judiciary is also involved in responding to these cases and is being held accountable by the women. Thank you.
And maybe we'll take a couple of questions and then respond.
Hi, my name is Srinusnani Sofjan. I'm a part of the Wairu Commission team. I'm from Malaysia. I don't have a question, but to complement a bit of what our discussant and presenter mentioned. I like what Mohammed mentioned about localizing, having to, understand the local context. And just to share again, to complement with the chair and Lana, is that we have a tool called community mapping, and Violet mentioned that. And also we have the local to local dialogue. So when community map what is in their environment, what they need and all that, then they also have a tool called local to local dialogue where they engage with their partners. So it's a process. And that diamond that Lana mentioned is a process where we don't work with individuals, we work with organized group. And investing in organizing is one thing that is always continuous. you invest in one group and it does not stop there, because you have to continue with investment and having them informed of what Muhammad said. And linking back to your the presentation about planning and paying for local action plan, in a way, Huairou Commission has also a program or an initiative, what we call Community Resilient Fund. The Community Resilient Fund is actually giving money to local groups that have done the mapping, that have done the dialogue with the local partners, looking at what need to be addressed and how they can also build resilience. One other point that I wanted to make also is that we mentioned about national GBV plans, but see, how do you link national GBV plan with plan like the National Urban Policy or the overall development plan? Many countries, many cities work in silo. How do you integrate that? How does the GBV plan is actually an integral part of the overall planning process in any settlement? Thank you.
One question here and then in the back, and then maybe I'll take over to the panelists. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in the sake, just to mention, for the sake of time of getting sure we.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chokas from the Philippines. I'm a grassroots leader of National Federation we call DAMPA. And I just want to share that about the UN Women, our partnership with the UN Women in terms of the sexual harassment in public spaces. So we are the one who make organizing of the youth organizations in our organizations. So we partner with the UN Women. We started in 2014, and now we passed resolutions in Quezon City, and it is replicated to other municipalities and cities. So we organize another eight cities and municipalities in Metro Manila in this sexual harassment in public spaces. So I think what my Isri told us, organizing is very important in terms of so that the local people, the grassroots people, can be a part in all these mechanisms and all this process. Because if not, nothing will happen, because we are the one who knows what are the problems in our community. So I think it is good that in terms of localizing, it's very important that we are involved. Thank you.
Are you okay to take two more? Yeah, and then maybe you can answer questions and give closing remarks.
I just quickly wanted to raise the issue of Indigenous women in Canada, and not to sort of portray that all Canadian women face the same level of access to resources. And so I just wanted to go to the issue of voices of privilege, assuming voices of experience, and how Canada has moved to requiring any kind of initiative to demonstrate that they actually involve women with lived expertise. And they've also demanded or now decided or put in a policy where Indigenous women must control their own resources and must be in charge of their own services. Mm-hmm. So that's helped shift the balance a bit.
Good morning. I am from Mira, Bufete, and Huairou Commission group, very big group here. And I would like, it's very interesting, the components that we are presented, that you presented about the participatory action plan. In Mexico, we have been working a lot in that sense with Urban Thinker Campus. We are working in that since 1915. And I think that it's important to integrate other components in this plan. And we are working together with this action participatory plan, social and solidarity economy, to put in the same plan, participatory budget, And in that case, we can raise governance, and it is very strong when we get that. Participatory with mapping, that CSW63 and Violet said, and in that case, we are doing, we are working public space like subway, because we are having a very big violence in Mexico City, and we are doing recorridos urbanos, urban working in that, and in the focus of safety city, the public space. I would like to say in Spanish, but I think I'm going to take a little. I'm going to explain later to my colleagues. Thank you.
I try to speak in English, sorry, but it's more important for us this meeting because I come from Peru. I am member of the governing council of UNU Commission, but my experience is in local government. No, I was authority, etc., etc. But remembering the history about the working from municipalities around the violence, gender violence, is more involved starting after the Beijing conference. In Peru, at least, we are working after the Beijing conference to promote the new policies and commitment of municipality and local authorities. But in this experience, was more important the organization of women. In the case of El Salvador, you show the El Salvador experience, the successful of all the experiences from international cooperation, local government, etc., is based on the strong movement of women. No, and this is a key. The local movement of women is vital for the experience. But for other hand, for my concern is the local authority normally says not money for violence. I was authority, I know. But in our experience, we talk to all the doors and researching about the public sources. And I get, for example, for one experience, a local, a house from the narcotraffic person who was in jail. So we talk to the house, and in this house, we organize local services for women and child. No, this is the experience in Peru. This program, called Jacaranda, was awarded by United Nations in 1998. No, several years ago. But it's one experience. The other experience is talk the door of the private sector. For example, the security companies. And the security companies, okay, what do you want? And I want the data from security companies, because in my country, several years ago, nobody say about the gender violence. No, for example, in the police station and the municipal station, nobody say about the gender violence. But in the security companies have more data, more details. So we involve with this private sector for data and for training program, our authorities, our policies, no, police station, etc., etc. So for us, it's more important the women and private sector, but always led by government. You know, for us, it's more important the commitment of the state, the government, and private sector is complementary. Thank you.
So I'm doing a time check, and I think maybe I'll definitely pass it back to our speakers, and Michelle also wants to pipe in.
Okay.
And then maybe if you can answer reflect on the questions and also your closing remarks.
Yeah, just with time, I'll just say in closing, thank you to Diego and Jessica for hosting this wonderful event. I feel very honored to be part of it. And it was really fascinating to learn about the New York context and bring that local level to where we are sitting. And, interesting to think about the parallels even between this global project and the work here in New York. And then just thank you so much to everyone for sharing your global experiences, especially kind of doing grassroots organizing, but also working with local governance. It really reflects, I think, the interest of this project to, the value of focusing on the local level, recognizing it is not neutral. There's different levels of privilege, different expertise when you draw on that local level, but also that ensuring that this gets elevated back up to the national level and that we also learn from each other in terms of best practices and within these diverse experiences that is shared. So I hope this is part of a kind of ongoing partnership and learning, and just very happy to be part of this discussion, which I think reflects the overall spirit of the project.
Yeah, I would just echo that. It's fascinating to me to hear from all of you and learn from all of you. I think in New York, we're an example of a big local government that's trying to organize around this issue and doing it through these large centers, which honestly you can start and have started in many countries, right, in smaller ways. And really what those centers represent is that collaboration between the NGOs and the grassroots communities and government, but making sure that it's led by community and led by the experiences of community. And we're constantly doing that in New York. We just embarked on a listening session out into our communities to figure out what we're not doing well with outreach. So we have a lot to learn too from all of you, and it informs what we're doing at the local government level. So again, thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Michelle on the line. Is Michelle, are you still on the line? Yeah. I know, it's late in Kuala Lumpur.
Still here.
Yeah.
I would also like to thank everyone for all these extremely interesting and valuable contributions. I agree. I think the value of this project is really trying to dig down into the local and really to find the resources to enable the local efforts and contributions that are coming from grassroots movements. So I hope that we will have some hopefully very useful evidence and learning from these pilots that will be relevant or can be used to inform efforts in different settings, and also to make the case to bring more stakeholders and more financing sources to the table to really address and prevent gender-based violence.
Great. Okay. Well, a big thank you to our speakers, to all of you for coming and sharing your experiences, to Sam and Amy from the conflict prevention team for partnering with us on this event, and these conversations are to be continued, and wishing you all a fantastic CSW, and a big hand again to all of our speakers. Thank you.